Україна.
Welcome to the X Global News Channel. The appointment of Valery Gerasimov, head of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation, as commander of a group of Russian troops in Ukraine took place back on January 11th. The Russian opposition media and channels were vigorously debating that this was the result of a back-and-forth struggle between Shoigu, Prigozhin, and Kadyrov. In reality, however, the logic of Gerasimov's appointment lies exclusively in the military plane. And here is why. There is no serious conflict or rift within Russia's so-called elites, and there is no elite in the European or American sense of the word. There is a group of individuals who have each received their own portion of the economy, industry, resources, or access to public money to feed them. All but 2 or 3 of these individuals have neither the ability nor the resources to run their own game and create their own political future as a new force within Russia. The versions of political analysts close to Mikhail Khodorkovsky that everything is about to collapse, that Prigozhin and Kadyrov have almost finished off Shoigu and have taken over the Ministry of Defense and the army are nothing more than the blind belief that such a conflict exists. For years, Khodorkovsky has been convincing those who work with him that his entourage cannot stand Putin, that they will throw him out and replace him, that they are fighting among themselves. They are fighting, but not to change Putin, but solely to get another fat piece of the pie. This situation has been fueled by Putin himself for many years. It is convenient for him to be above the fray and vary the degree of his support to one or the other. He is an arbitrator, or, closer to Putin, an authority, to whom people come for judgment on their own terms. In this game, all its participants proceed from one main rule: never to challenge Putin's authority and never to hurt those whom Putin has put in charge of key spheres of his life. This includes the army, the Federal Guard Service, the defense industry, and the oil and gas sector, where people were placed not according to their abilities, but according to a high level of personal loyalty to Putin. Igor Sechin is as much an oilman and businessman as Sergei Shoigu is a military man. Rosgvardia commander Viktor Zolotov is no more than a personal security guard. And all of them are totally dependent on Putin and will never do anything that goes against his interests. Not out of nobility, but out of fear. Everyone else in the game knows very well that for this loyalty Putin makes these people untouchable to the other members of the group. To try to intrigue to remove any of them, or even simply to interfere with their plans, is to sign their own death warrant. So all the stories about Prigozhin and Kadyrov's plans for Russian domination by overthrowing Shoigu are nothing more than speculation and wishful thinking. Prigozhin and Kadyrov are nothing more than cogs in the machine, but they are not independent players. When the Russian opposition claimed in the fall that General Lapin, Shoigu's protégé, was dismissed because of his conflict with Prigozhin and Kadyrov, our sources in the Russian General Staff and the group's headquarters wagged their fingers at their heads and laughed merrily. Lapin was removed because of a succession of mistakes he made. He made them because he was not able to make independent decisions and react to the changing situation. The general was recalled, given a rest, but he neither fell into disgrace nor was he blacklisted. The public attacks on Lapin by Kadyrov and Prigozhin, first of all, did not go beyond the scope of telegraph channels. There was no conflict at all in the official Russian media, and second, they were caused by Lapin's arbitrary treatment of Chechen and private military units, whom he wanted to give orders to and even managed to do so, while Kadyrov and Prigozhin were offended. Now about General Gerasimov himself. He was the author of all the plans for the seizure of Ukraine that the Russian armed forces have tried to implement since the beginning of the war. The seizure of the airfield in Gostomel, the landing of a large landing force there, and the rapid operation to seize the center of Kiev in February were his idea. He was also the author of other, so far unrealized plans to encircle the eastern grouping of the armed forces of Ukraine, to land troops in Odessa and at the Dniester estuary, and to attack Lutsk and Lvov. When the victorious March of February turned into a series of defeats, Gerasimov was furious, according to officers of the General Staff. He blamed the failure on the performers, down to the unit commanders, swore at the procurers who had embezzled the entire army. At the private military companies, which had failed in their task of taking control of the entrances to Kiev and key crossroads on the way to the city center. After the February defeats and the abandonment of his plans for new adventurous offensives in southern Ukraine, Gerasimov withdrew from Group Command for several months and stayed out of the general's hands in the field. During the summer he was busy drawing up plans for new offensives that required mobilization. One such plan, the main one, was an attack on Lutsk-Lvov, which Gerasimov imagined would end the war and lead Ukraine to surrender. The appointment of Surovikin as commander of the group, according to our sources in the General Staff of the Russian Armed Forces, was not a victory of Prigozhin, but a decision by Gerasimov himself, who had suggested surrendering Kherson back in spring. Surovikin put this idea of his chief into practice. Gerasimov's plans for the Lutsk-Lviv offensive were presented to Putin as a recipe for victory in the war. Gerasimov, according to sources in the General Staff and the Soviet Union, had told Putin several times that he wanted to personally lead the operations so as not to repeat the February debacle. At the end of December, Putin gave such permission, making Gerasimov responsible for future victory or defeat. On January 10, at Gerasimov's suggestion, General Lapin was appointed Chief of the General Staff of the Ground Forces of the Russian Federation. Lapin is an ideal subordinate for Gerasimov. He follows the commander's orders to the comma, does not show unnecessary initiative, however, necessary, too, does not ask unnecessary questions, and is always ready to rat out the commander on those who disagree or want to disobey. He is an ideal candidate for the Chief of Staff of the Ground Forces, which will bear the main burden of the coming offensive operations. On January 11 the head of the General Staff became the commander of the group, and Prigozhin's man, Sergei Surovikin, became his deputy. The first thing Gerasimov did even before his appointment was to redeploy army units from Bakhmut to Soledar, and it was their forces that broke through the AFU defense in this area. He used some of Surovikin's accumulated shell stock. Shell hunger in the Russian armed forces is artificial and caused by the accumulation of ammunition for offensive operations. The second is that he forced the private military companies to cooperate with the army. The mercenaries fought city battles in Soledar after breaking through the defenses outside the city. Immediately after his appointment, according to several sources in the General Staff of the Russian Armed Forces, Gerasimov checked the level of readiness of the Russian grouping located in western Belarus, Lutsk direction, then he undertook a check of the units standing in the Belgorod region, Kharkov direction. Valery Gerasimov, according to his comrades in arms and subordinates, thinks in terms of big numbers and big plans. The events of the fall and early winter show that he got everything necessary to implement these plans. The grouping has been increased to over 700,000 men, and up to 200,000 more are waiting for orders, running around in saunas and massage parlors in Russia's faraway rear. Artillery ammunition has been accumulated for active combat operations on several fronts within a month. The equipment is just a little bit collected. Some were pulled out, some were brought in from critical territories. Some of it was pulled out of deep reserves. After all, after the Soviet Union there were thousands of such stocks left throughout the Russian Federation and the entire post-Soviet space. From shells to chemically protected tanks. Valery Gerasimov will need some more time, a week to 2 weeks, to get to grips with the recently received holdings. After that he will proceed with the implementation of his ideas. It is gratifying that the AFU knows what to expect from Gerasimov, and this is not the actively announced attacks on Kiev and Chernihiv by Z channels. It is not happy that the plans of the man with strange eyes will drive tens of thousands of people from both the Russian and Ukrainian sides to the grave. He always wanted to fight like in the Great Patriotic War. So that here divisions would march in the fields, artillery would level cities with the ground, and he would have hundreds, not tens of thousands, and officers looking into his mouth, says an officer of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation who served with Gerasimov and before the General Staff. This appointment is a harbinger of the imminent intensification of terrible hostilities. And on a scale that has not been seen since the beginning of the war. That is why everything is in motion in Kiev and at Ramstein, and Zelensky is demanding more equipment. There is no time to wait. In the spring or even before the spring, there will be terrible events for which Ukraine and the Ukrainian people must be prepared. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and enable notifications to be informed of new events. Also like us and write your opinion in the comments. Thank you for watching us.